welcome back to another episode of Rolling Through Life, and once again I'm on board a cruise ship, and this time I'm back with Jim. How you doing today?
Very good, very good. We've had an excellent cruise so far.
So once again, we're coming from a remote destination for this latest episode. We're somewhere in the Caribbean, working our way towards Haiti, and then eventually to the Bahamas.
We're going to go through what's called the Windward Passage between the island of Dominica, which is Haiti and Dominican Republic, and the island of Cuba, and on into the Bahamas.
So just like the last episode where I talked about this cruise with Isabel and discussion a bit about the caregiving side of that, we're going to spend this episode talking about this cruise as well, and a little bit more from your perspective, as I think you were the driving force behind this cruise vacation. So let's start at the beginning, and why a cruise in the first place? Why did you decide on this mode of transport?
Well, I've always been interested in wanting to do the Panama Canal cruise. Excuse me, I'm always interested in human achievement, whether it is climbing Mount Everest or going to the moon or building the Panama Canal. And I won't be climbing Mount Everest or going to the moon, but the Panama Canal was always there. And we've always thought about doing a cruise. I don't think we'd be the type of people just to do a Caribbean sunspot to sunspot cruise. So this fit the bill. And we actually planned to do this a year ago in 2017. But then I was injured, and we actually pulled it off a year later. Quite incredible.
So, what brought you to decide to do this after your accident? Because as you mentioned, I think Mom talked about it too, this was in the plans before your injury, and after the injury it kind of got wiped off the docket, much with similar other expeditions you've done. So what made you decide, no, we can still do this, and let's actually try and make this happen?
Yeah, it's always been on the back of our minds, and then we were at one of the small shopping malls in Chilliwack, and we went by the cruise ship center, the travel agent, and I said to Isabel, let's go in and ask. And the woman, we walked in, and I said, who should I talk to? And a woman stood up and said, come and talk to me. And Isabel said, come and sit down, Jim. And the woman says, you're Jim Ryan. I said, yes, I am. She says, my husband is a pilot at WestJet as well. So her name was Tamara, and Tamara really went to town for us to make it sound like we could pull it off. And after discussion, we decided we'd give it a try.
So after that discussion with Tamara, was it, okay, smooth sailing, this is totally up our alley? Like, were there still questions in your mind about whether or not this is doable, / is this a good idea?
Endless questions. First of all, we had to find an assistant because Isabel can't do it on her own. So Daniel stepped forward, and he's been with us for the 3 weeks, and it's made all the difference in the world. We would never been able to do it without an assistant, and Daniel's really helped. So that was a huge step. You have to understand, we have to pay for 3 people instead of 2. We need a larger room because we need the handicap room. So the cost was a huge factor. But that was only the beginning. Then we had to try to find all the bits and pieces to move me around and keep me clean and feed me, and the whole shooting match, as they say, and find a flight home. So it was a lot of work in the end.
What was your biggest fear before going on this cruise?
The biggest fear, I think there was 2 fears for me. One was my health, that it wasn't going to hold, and we'd have huge issues with that. And the other was the stress it would cause on Isabel. I mean, dealing with me, and if things were going badly, the stress on her would have been incredible. So that was very worrisome. So yeah, it truly is my health and care that is the biggest hurdle.
So how have those panned out now that we're reaching the end of this cruise?
I have to say it's worked out way, way better than expected. Holland America is the cruise line we are on, and they've gone above and beyond. The crew is phenomenal. The room is worked out really well. It's a bit of a bigger room, so I have room to drive my wheelchair around. The bathroom is fantastic. It's a roll-in bathroom, roll-in shower, so that works really well. And the ship is almost entirely accessible, so I can go virtually everywhere. And to top it all off, the crew is fantastic. So, yes, it's worked out way better than we expected. As a matter of fact, after this podcast, we are going to go downstairs and try to book our next cruise for 2020 to go to the Baltic. So, always planning ahead, driving Isabel nuts.
So you just answered one of my future questions I was going to ask. I was going to ask you if you would do it again, and it sounds already like you're there. So what about cruising? And in particular, this cruise has been terrific. So what has gotten you the confidence to say, yeah, this is going to work, let's just go ahead and book the next one?
Again, the biggest fear was I would be stuck in my room, and the room would be very difficult to maneuver in, and I would not be able to move around the ship. And if I couldn't do any of that, the cruise would be futile. Well, it turns out the room has worked out really well. The ship has worked out really well. The crew is fantastic. The shore excursions are a little bit of a test, but we've made that work really well. So overall, it's been an excellent experience.
So let's talk about the port excursions for a minute, since we talked about that briefly, since you mentioned it. What were your expectations before you went on this cruise? What did you think the ports were going to be like? Did you expect to get off? Did you expect to be able to go and explore? Or did you think that you would stay on the ship as me and Isabel went off? What were your expectations before actually going?
We had discussed previously, and really we only had two ports that would work out well. One was San Diego, which is known as a very accessible city, and it's an American city, a newer city, so it's more up to date. And we did not do any planned tours, but we made it on the USS Midway, an aircraft carrier from the Vietnam War, and then drove around the city. It was very accessible. And the other tour was the island of Aruba. It was the only place we found with a wheelchair accessible tour, and a gentleman drove us around in a wheelchair van, and we did the whole island tour. So everywhere else was, I hate to say the word, a bit of a crapshoot. I don't know what else to say, but we visited our good friends James and Lisa, and James's brother Ken and his wife Allie in Puerto Vallarta, and they were there for their son's wedding. And getting to their hotel was only about 500 meters, but the roads were terrible, so it was a real off-road experience. Really no sidewalks or anything, but we pulled it off, and we had a grand time. And then we did get off in Manzanillo and in, I think, Puerto Chiapas, and we drove around just in the port area, and it was actually really quite accessible. The curb cuts were not the North American standard, but they were there. I could not get into a lot of the stores. There was always steps, or they're very small, but that's fine. We had a grand time driving around the little port areas for 2 afternoons.
So it sounds like the ports were more accessible than you were expecting, and you got off more times than planned. Is that correct?
That's right. I really thought I would not get off very much at all, but we did. We did quite well, so I'm very happy about that.
So one thing that me and Isabel talked about in the last podcast is that one of the challenges of a cruise is that we aren't in our home environment. We don't have all of the gear set up. We don't have our routines established, and everything is kind of a learning experience for a routine, getting you in and out of bed. And we talked about this from a caregiving side, but from your perspective, has there been challenges or successes in trying to adapt to this new environment, not having everything set up for you as it is at home?
Of course, it's a challenge to reset everything and move forward. But again, you and Mom Isabel have been very good at adapting to the new, as you say, environment and trial and error. And we've really had a routine come together, and it's kept me healthy, and I don't think it's been too onerous on you. I mean, I am a pain in the you-know-what, but that's beside the point.
We're still talking, so.
Yeah, but our mornings start off slowly. Getting the incredible bulk moving takes quite a while. So it's been a challenge, but over the last 3 weeks, we've overcome virtually everything, and we've moved forward.
So another thing we can talk about is a lot of people go on a cruise to relax, to get some rest or relaxation. How do you do that? Do you find that you are getting some relaxation on this cruise, and what do you do to relax?
I do, yeah, we are relaxed. I think we've, the first week to 10 days is waiting for all the stress to come off. And now I think we're more relaxed. I do a lot of reading, which is good. I have books on my iPad and magazines. I have listened to a few podcasts. A lot of times I look out the window and watch the waves, and surprisingly, or maybe unsurprisingly, a lot of people want to come up and talk to me about my injury and my accident and my life as a quadriplegic, and how is a quadriplegic on a cruise, and so they all find that very interesting. So that does pass a lot of my day. But yeah, it's been very, very good.
Good. I think all the people coming up and talking to you just proves my point a little bit about why I insisted on doing this podcast and your YouTube and everything else. Is that when we first did the first podcast about you being a paddleboarding quadriplegic, you just act as if, like, why is anybody asking any questions? This is just a natural thing. People paddleboard. I'm a person. Let's go paddleboarding. And I, being the oblivious observer, was asking lots of questions and saying, why on earth would you do this? Now, a cruise ship is very, very different from a paddleboard, but I think it raises the same questions. A lot of people don't step outside the door and decide not to do anything. And I think that's why it's important we do this podcast, because I think it's very interesting, as I think the hundreds of people who have come up and spoken to you find it very interesting that you choose to do these things. So I think we've talked about this a little bit before, but what makes you, again, decide to do these things? What makes you different from the other people who are in wheelchairs or in similar situations, who are either too afraid or unwilling or think they're unable to do these things? What makes you decide, okay, let's go and do this thing?
But I don't think being in a wheelchair is a point. I think a lot of people are afraid of doing virtually everything, and a lot of people are afraid to step out of their comfort zone and try. So if you don't try, it becomes very difficult to move forward. So I'm in a wheelchair and I'm a quadriplegic, but darn it, there's a whole world and a whole life out there. Let's go and enjoy it. And do I spend money? Well, I earn money, and we earn money. We saved like crazy, and we could do a whole podcast on saving. It drives Daniel and the rest of our children nuts. But we saved and we planned for this, and here we are. And yes, I'm in a wheelchair, and it's more expensive. It's quite a bit more difficult in a lot of ways, but then in a lot of ways it's very rewarding. And step out of your comfort zone and go and try. Talk to people. You'll be surprised how good people really are.
So I think one of the limitations you hit on here is stepping outside your comfort zone. I think finances do become a play, but I think for the most part, people are afraid of stepping outside the comfort zone. So do you get nervous? When is the last time you stepped outside your comfort zone? Is this cruise stepping outside your comfort zone, or does this seem reasonable? I'm putting you on the spot now.
To me, it seems reasonable, believe it or not. Again, I worry about my health, and I worry tremendously about Isabel, the stress that she feels, and rightly so. I'm worrying about her health and my health and whether it's all going to work. But all that being said, what the heck? Let's give it a try. Worst comes to worst, we'll find a way home. But yeah, step out of your comfort zone. Go for a walk. Go for a hike. Go and talk to somebody, and you'll be surprised. It really makes a difference.
Yeah, I think it's a really important point, and I think you've constantly proven that. Doing all these different things. Again, I've said that I think a lot of people question how is a quadriplegic doing this activity. Again, I think a cruise ship is relatively low on that list for you. You've done a lot of different things, I think, after your accident, and a lot of them raise a few questions, such as, like I said, the paddleboarding event, also the sailing, sip and puff sailing is a whole other thing we haven't really talked about. But you've done a number of things which I think a lot of people raise their eyebrows at, and it's terrific that you're doing it, but I think it's important to illustrate the point that just no matter what it be, whether it be a cruise, whether it be a hike, or stepping outside your front door, that you should step outside your comfort zone and just see what happens.
I think, I find it rewarding for me, and I think other people, even today, I had 3 different people come up and wanted to talk to me about my wheelchair and my accident, or what am I doing on a cruise. And I just explained that I've always wanted to do the Panama Canal cruise, and yes, I was injured, but here we are. Why not? And I think they find it rewarding, and all I'm doing is driving around and saying hello to people. And if you go out, go for a walk and say hello to people, or even at the restaurant, or just say hello to your server, or the person serving you, or someone who's sitting beside you, you'll be surprised. It's get away from your computer, your phone, and your TV, and go outside.
All right, I think that's a really important point, and I think the last thing we can talk about with this in relation to this cruise is how is this cruise and this travel experience compared to the previous travel you've done? You've traveled in aircraft and other forms of transportation. How is this compared? Is it easier, harder, or similar to other travel?
It's when you travel in an airplane or even a car, normally you're going to your destination. Traveling on a cruise ship, or in our opinion a train, is the trip is the destination. So our vacation is being on our travel mode. And for us, once we got established, it took several days, I won't lie, for all of us to be comfortable. For a person like me, it's a good lifestyle. I have some, talking to people and get out, and I can get a bit of private time, and sometimes I just sleep in the sun on the deck and watching the waves. Well, I'm not watching because I'm asleep, but
you get the point.
It's very comfortable, so it's social and it's private, so for me it's very good.
Is there anything else you want to add about cruising in particular?
Be careful, because you don't do much physical activity, and man, you can eat a lot. Even I have to watch my weight. But it's a peaceful lifestyle. It's not a Caribbean party cruise. It's a cruise with older persons such as ourselves, and for me it works really, really well. It might work well for you too. The Alaska cruise is very, very popular, and I think it's a cruise where the destination is a cruise with some very good excursions, and I think that's what works very well for me. Because of my situation, I can't hike mountains anymore or go for long walks.
So this works out really well as a mode of transport and a bit of a vacation for you. So we still have a little bit of time left, and I mentioned something I actually do want to double back and talk about because we haven't talked about it on the podcast, and even off the podcast, you and I haven't talked about this very much. So I mentioned you have been sip and puff sailing, and let's talk about that for a few minutes. So first, just explain how the heck that works and how you got the opportunity to do this.
So the Handicap Society, and I can't remember the name of the group in Vancouver, owns probably a half a dozen handicap sailing boats. And so it's a 2-person boat, sailboat, that's set up to be very difficult to flip over for obvious reasons. And it's for one handicapped person and one able-bodied person. And a lot of times it's for a paraplegic who can help get themselves onto the boat, and they have their arms to steer the boat, and you run the sails. And for someone like me, there's a couple of boats set up with sip and puffs, and the one I took out, we had one sip and puff that I could control the rudder with, so I could turn the boat left and right, port and starboard in naval terms. It is possible to set up the boat with a second sip and puff to control the sail, but we chose not to do it for the first time around. My good friend Chris Hoy, who's a pilot with me at WestJet, is also a big sailor, is a member of the Disabled Sailing Society in Vancouver, and he emailed and said, let's go sailing. And I said, are you sure? He says, yeah. I said, I'll go if you take me. So he says, that's excellent. So he arranged it all, and we rolled in, and just like the lift they used to get me in and out of bed, they have the same lift, and they lifted me into the sailboat on land, and the sailboat was on a trailer, and they rolled Chris and I into the water, and off we went.
So is this stepping outside your comfort zone, or is this still in the realm of reasonable?
That was quite a bit more nerve-wracking, because you're very close to the water, and a little bit nervous, a lot nervous, I'll be honest, of falling in. As I say, I've already drowned once. I don't want to repeat the act. And I had a very good life jacket on, a life preserver. And like I said, the boat's set up that it's very, very difficult to flip over. And if the winds were too strong, we wouldn't have gone out anyways. As it was sort of a perfect day. The winds were very calm at the shore, and as you worked your way further out, they were a bit stronger, but really not bad at all. So I did feel safe in the end, although I was quite apprehensive to start.
How did you find the actual sailing portion? Did you find it easy to direct the boat as you wanted? Did it take some practice, or was there some nuance to it?
Yeah, it would take practice. The problem for me is I've lost so much feeling, is that I can't feel the wind in the water, so I'm always reacting, not proacting to the situation. So I feel the gust much too late, so I turn the boat much too late. So I wouldn't be a great sailor. I think with practice I would be okay. We tried to go a second time, but we just couldn't make our schedules work. So hopefully we'll try it 2 or 3 times next year. It could be a lot of fun. It's a very nice little thing to do that's different for us.
Yeah, absolutely. So how long were you out sailing in total?
Yeah, they only give you just over an hour, so it's very quick, which is a bit sad. It would be fun to practice a bit more and get out a bit more. If I win the lottery, I'll buy one. We can go out a few times every month and have fun. But right now, it's just for fun.
Fair enough. All right, let's talk very briefly about the Panama Canal, which was the whole point of this cruise. And I think, as you mentioned at the beginning of this, that you've always had this fascination with the Panama Canal and human endeavors. So just talk about that for a few minutes. When did you first learn about the Panama Canal, and what were you so interested in about?
Yeah, being the weird person that I am, I probably read the Panama Canal stories, the novels and the books written about it when I was a teenager in middle school or high school. And I always found it very interesting that they could build something that goes through the continental divide, through the mountains, and all the way from one ocean to the other, and all the politics around it. So the whole thing, and thousands that had to die to build it. Safety, on-job safety didn't exist back then like it does today. So very, very interesting. And just to see all the work that people did a century ago. Really something.
And just see that work still standing, the fact that they haven't modified it or had to overhaul. They have modified, I guess, in some sections, but for the most part, all of it is the original cement and original construction from 1914.
Exactly, and what they have done is built a series of locks adjacent to the original locks that are much bigger for larger ships. When they built the locks, they built them 1,000 feet long, just over 300 meters, because they thought that was how big the ships would be, but the ships are much larger now, so they built a new set of locks. So really, really quite interesting.
How did the actual canal live up to your expectations? Did you have expectations that were met, some that weren't? Was there something that you didn't fundamentally understand, and once you saw it, you're like, oh, that makes sense? Like,
I thought there would be excuse me, more locks. I didn't realize the 3 chambers at one end were all together, and then at the other end there was 2 chambers, and then a bit further on the final lock. So each lock, each chamber goes up about 30 feet, 10 meters, for a total of, I think it was 85 feet.
I think so, yeah.
Because that's how high they had to go above sea level. Sorry, that was my phone. Above sea level to get from one ocean to the other. So I thought they were more spread out, but in the end it worked out really well to see it. And Panama City is huge. I never realized that, but then it's a banking city, so with all the tax laws in the world, that's what's become there.
I thought the interesting point, the thing that I think I missed for all my learning about the Panama Canal, the thing I didn't truly understand, which makes perfect sense when you think about it, but was neat to understand when I was there, was that it's all fueled by fresh water, which is all fueled by rainwater more specifically. Again, in my head, I think I had just imagined that one ocean is higher than the other and the water runs downhill. But the reality is, as you said, it's sea level for a reason. They're at the same height. And in fact, you're going up and over Panama instead of going down from one ocean to the other. So all of the water used to fuel the locks to raise and lower the boats come from rainwater that fall down the mountains and into the canal. And that was a really interesting, I guess, revelation for me that I didn't quite realize this, which it makes perfect sense if you think about it, but I hadn't made that conclusion, and to see this and to try and understand the amount of rain that they must get to fuel this, and the fact that it's gone 100 years and they haven't had an occasion where the rain has dried up.
Yeah, they told us that they get 200 inches of rain a year, so it makes Vancouver, that makes a little less than half of that, seem like a nice dry city. And we complain about the rain in Vancouver. So it is. And with the new locks, the larger locks they put in, they actually have a reservoir for each lock. So when they empty the water from the lock to lower the ships, the water goes into a reservoir to use for the next set of locks. So they actually reuse the water 3 times to save water, because the ships are getting so big and so much water is going through the locks. Very, very interesting how they overcome these problems and use gravity. Gravity is such a powerful force, we forget.
So what are some other cruises you're going to be looking at doing in the future, since it sounds like we have a couple more coming up?
Yeah, so we're planning the Baltic cruise in 2020. Very preliminary planning, but it would be awfully fun to do the Scandinavian countries, Sweden, Finland, Norway. You start in Amsterdam, which is great, Denmark, Germany, and especially St. Petersburg in Russia. You spend 2 nights there even, so you get 2 full days to tour, and it would be wonderful to do things like the Winter Palace and the museum, whose name I forget right now, the huge museum there. So I'd really like to do stuff like that. And the other one we've talked about is around the tip of South America, which I'm almost positive are the Straits of Magellan. And you touch into Antarctica, which would be awfully neat to do. I can't climb the 7 tallest mountains in the world. Even if I was healthy, I would never be able to do it. But it will be fun to do something like that. But that one's far in the future, and our age and health might prohibit us from that.
One step at a time, and it sounds like the next one's already on the docket, so we'll see how that goes, and we'll move forward from there.
We're hoping that it all works, doing our best.
Anything else you want to add before we sign off for the day?
I've been very fortunate to have Isabel and Daniel help me make this all a success. I'm very lucky that we do have the wherewithal to pull it off and the support, and get out there and try. It's amazing. We're very, very lucky, and I guess it drives Isabel nuts because I'm always willing to try the next thing.
I think it's better to want to try the next thing than be too afraid to try anything.
When you fail, people are not watching. Don't worry about it. If they laugh at you, laugh with them. I do stupid things all the time, and it is quite humorous.
That's the only way to learn. I mean, if you can't let the failure stop.
Not at all. Not at all.
Anyway, if you haven't already, please subscribe to the podcast. You can subscribe on iTunes on your iPhone, or you can subscribe through your favorite podcast app on Android. You can also go to our website, www.myquadriplegic.life. You'll find stories there. Jim is writing a blog about accessibility around the cruise ship, and we'll be writing one shortly about accessibility in some of the ports we visited. From there, you can find Jim on Twitter at JimRyanRTL. The RTL is for Rolling Through Life. And I'm at Piloteerman on Twitter. And finally, you can follow us on YouTube. We have a series of videos coming out from this cruise. Once we get back to the land of internet, they'll be uploading shortly. You can find him on youtube.com under JimRyanRTL, again, for Rolling Through Life. Once again, thanks for listening, and thanks for joining me.
Thanks for listening to us, and we'll talk to you again soon.